when they come here and where you've lived, just a little bit about that first, if you will.
Well, I don't know what time they was in here. They was in here in the early 90s, you know, I mean 80s, not 80s, but Dad was born in 83, 63.
1863.
1863. And he moved up here in Syracuse. We had the two places. We had one here and one in Bountiful. And us poor guys on this family up here had to take and do all the work. You know what I mean? But there was only about, when I was born and can remember, there was only about 5 or 6 families here in Syracuse. And Dad's brother was one of the first bishops, as I remember, in Syracuse. And he lived in here, down here by the Bluff Road, you know, on that side of the road where that, I don't know who lives there now. It's just before you go off the bluff. And they had a tithing granary, a log granary there that they used to put their tithing money in grain when they thrashed it. It was dry farm then. And then that was Sam Cook's dad and mother.
David Cook.
Yeah, David Cook. Do you remember them?
No. I remember Samuel, not David.
Well, that was their mother and father down there that lived there. And they had a tithing shed.
Was there more than one building there in the tithing granaries?
Just one big log building. That when they threshed this grain, they'd pay their tithing in grain and dump it in that building. And then in the winter, they'd mash it up and then make flour out of it and stuff.
How big was the building? Do you remember?
Oh, I don't remember. It'd be a pretty good sized building, probably 50 by 50 or something like that. Had kind of a 2-story deal. But there was only about 4 families here and 4 or 5 families here in Syracuse. And they all lived in frame houses. Later on, they come and built some out of brick like Cradle did. Cradle built some out of brick. And the Beezer home was out of brick over here. But most of it was out of wood. You know what I mean? All the buildings were out of wood. See, the Steve building come in later. That's out of brick. And
Probably Tom Thurgood's.
Tom Thurgood was out of brick, see. But they come in later. They come in a little later. I don't know what year they came in, but they came in later and then they started building them in brick. The Christensen place is out of brick. He was in later. But most all these frame houses is built out of wood that was in here early. Our old place was made out of wood.
What was your dad's name?
Amos.
Amos.
My dad was Amos and Emma Adelaide Wood Cook. And I was the 11th child of 14 children. I was 11th. And I'm the only one left of the 14 of us.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what some of the memories you have of the early childhood, Walt?
What do you mean there remembers?
Well, school or socials or activities with the kids as you was growing up?
Oh, we grew up, we went to school here in Syracuse. We had to walk to school. We lived over there on that, well, you know where we used to live, Jim.
On Warren's place, was it?
across,
Over.
down from Lee Warren's,
Yeah.
on that side of the road. But we used to have to walk to school across to the fields, and that was all dry for them then, though. When we went to school, and then they had a high school up there on that Christian Cornice. You remember that?
I know of it, I've heard of it.
And they had a high school up there, and when we got through grade school, we went to high school up there.
Did they have a store up there by the high school?
A little confectionery.
Was it just west of the, or east, west of the,
West of the schoolhouse.
what did they sell? What did they,
Oh, it was more just knickknacks to us kids and that was going to school and stuff.
more confectionery than a grocery store? Who was the principal when you was going to high school? You remember?
Oh,
Art Anderson would be after that, or it was
no, Art was down to this school. He wasn't ever up to that other school.
high school. He was here.
It seems to me like there was a Peterson or Patterson or something that was a principal of that school up
Of the
there.
high school.
I only went 2 years up there. Those guys were so busy farming and stuff like that. Trying to make a living for the rest of them.
What do you raise on your farm? What crops?
Oh, it's mostly wheat and hay and stuff like that, grain.
They handle it much different than they did then, don't they?
Oh, it was all,
Harvested.
yeah, we used to take a little more and more and then windrow it and put it in piles, you know what I mean?
The
And
grain.
then pitch it on your wagon and you had a big fork and you stack it out outside. We used to have big stacks of hay.
Then the thrasher come. Who operated the thrasher then, you know? I think Orson Bybee used to at one time in Stoddard.
I think Orson did for a while. And then there was a fellow come in from Hupper that used to thrash quite a lot of grain.
Would that be Stoddard?
Oh, he'd be west and south from there. Yeah, I suppose. It's the only two I've known of around our area. Do you play any sports in school, Walt?
Oh yeah, we used to play baseball all the time.
Baseball was quite a thing, wasn't it, in the community?
We played baseball when Art Anderson was teaching us here in this schoolhouse.
In the grade school, huh?
Yeah.
What position do you play?
Well, I played quite a lot of second baseman, and I caught a little, used to catch a little.
Did you?
Oh, I played a lot of baseball and a lot of basketball.
Hmm.
A lot of basketball. But we soon grew up away from that, though. Oh, I used to play basketball after I was married down here.
Did you?
In that building that burned down.
The cultural hall?
Hmm?
The cultural hall here?
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about that. They hold dances there, movies, or what they do there?
Well, they done a little of everything. They'd have little wrestling matches and boxing matches and
What
all
they-
that stuff in there.
Remember that?
Yeah, I remember them
Yeah.
having smokers in there.
If you
Boxing
had a
match.
picture of it, they put me boxing with Lee Warren, you know what I mean? And Lee was quite hot-headed. And he's quite a lot older than I was. 5 or 6, 7 years, maybe older than that. But When we got to going, I thought, well, I'd reach out and just poke him a little, and make him mad. And then I could stay away from him for a second or two, and then I could step up and about hold him on with him. But we had quite a lot of fun together, all of us. But I had my new Ford when I was 19 years old. I bought a new Ford at 19. Yeah.
When you say you played basketball after, did they have a county tournament or church or?
Little of everything. They only had the one ward here in Syracuse at the time, but they'd get Clearfield and different wards come in and play. We'd play basketball with them. Same as you do now. They'd match it up with something.
So you played baseball, basketball, and boxed a little bit, huh?
Yeah. But I used to enjoy sports a lot.
In the cultural hall, they hold movies once a week.
Yeah.
You remember the silent movies?
Mm-hmm. Always all silent movies.
We interviewed a lady that used to play the piano at the silent movies. It's Art Anderson's brother's wife, Emily Parker now, I think. She was Emily Smith, and married Owen Anderson. She is telling us she used to play the piano for those silent movies. If they get into a Western, why she'd speed it up for a love scene and be tender, soft. Well, you remember those, huh?
Yeah, I sure do. Yeah, I remember that.
Then the dances, they hold dances. Who was the orchestra, some of them?
No, I don't remember who played the orchestra. But
well, Walt, we'd appreciate you telling us a little bit about your cattle business, when you started, and what effect it has on the farmers. Now, who some of them that had the biggest, most, and a little bit about that, would you?
Well, pretty near all your farmers used to feed a few cattle. Maybe not too many, maybe 50 or so at one time, but when they bought the church house, farm up here, why, they had me, I handled the cattle on that steak farm for 28 years. Trucked them, plain and trucked them out and bought it, and I had their own checkbook, and Harold Steed was the secretary, and he said when someone signed a check, why, with him, he had to have someone co-sign with him. But they turned me over with the checkbook, and I could write the check and handle their cattle and stuff like that. And I handled them for 28 years up there till they quit.
Quite a trust then they had in you, and I'm sure you done good for
I
them.
never, Peterson told me that all the cattle I bought from on the state farm never did lose them any money.
How many did they run a year?
Well, we'd feed about 2 crops a year. We'd buy steers and feed out in the fields in the winter, because that place was so run down. You couldn't grow nothing on it. And that cold place. And we'd take and feed cattle out in the fields in the winter, and then buy a bunch of heifers in the fall, west coasting cows, and feed them in the yard. And when they got big enough, why then we'd fatten them right on out. 2 crops a year we had there all the time. Maybe 300 or 400 head. I had 2 trucks when I was up there, and I trucked the cattle in and out. And I've got my first time to get a gallon of gas. I was charging a gallon of gas for that damn stuff.
I think the farm was basically paid by the cattle operation, the state farm.
Well, I stayed with them for 8 years. And then I thought, well, I'd have my turn. I'd certainly have let someone else take chance on it, you know what I mean? So I turned all my papers in. I got through on a Friday afternoon. I turned all my papers in, all my checks, stuff in, all the receipts into Harold Steed up at the bank. And that very same night, all 3, the president and his 2 counselors, sat right where you fellows are. And they give me to understand that they had 2 more payments on that farm. And it was the cattle that was making their payment, and I had to stay with them 2 more years. So I agreed to stay with them for 2 more years, providing they would pick a man to help me, and I'd learn him in 2 years so he could handle the cattle on the state farm. And Haslam said to me, he said, "You mean to tell me that you can take and learn a man all you know to handle them cattle on the state farm, all you know?" I said, "I didn't say that. I said I could break him in enough so he can handle the cattle on your state farm." And Haslam said to me, he says, "Well," he said, "do you know what we're going to do with you if you quit us in 2 years?" I said, "I have no idea." He says, "We're going to make a stake missionary out of you." And I said, "President," I said, "I've got news for you." I said, "I can break a man to handle the cattle in 2 years, to handle your cattle on that stake farm a lot quicker than you're going to make a stake missionary out of me." And I stayed with them. I never did quit them. I stayed with them all the time. I stayed with them till they quit.
That's remarkable.
Quit having cattle.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, I stayed with them, but I quit handling cattle up there.
Walt, the early years of your marriage, you farmed here in Syracuse, didn't you? The early years of your marriage, you farmed in Syracuse?
Yeah. I farmed all the time in Syracuse.
And then you went to Idaho?
Well, I moved, when they burnt my barn down and stuff in there then, that time.
Do you know what year that was?
And I was back in, I think 27. I think that was back in 27.
And is that when you went to Idaho?
Mm-hmm. And then we only stayed a couple of 3 years up there.
In Idaho Falls?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you
moved back in here.
Then when you moved back, where did you move to?
Well, I moved back into a little frame house that Gerald Waite had there, out there. I lived in there for a while. And then I went up on to Alm Cook's place and farmed his place for a while. And then went into that Smith place up there and farmed that.
Where the Freeport is now?
Mm-hmm.
Is that where you was farming when the Freeport took over?
And then when they come in and the Navy took over at that time, where the Freeport is now, they give us farmers all a job. And they put me on the roof when they got under construction. They put me on the roof with a 35 or 40 men roofing them buildings. And then when they went on civil service, I quit. And went to work for Kaysville County Company here, field man for Kaysville Company.
Oh, did you?
And I stayed with them for 2 years, and then they got some of those buildings got, roofs got to leaking and stuff like that because it was on a cost plus base, you know, and they didn't care how they was put on. It was on a cost plus base anyway. So they called me back and wanted me to go back and run a bunch of men on that roof. They give me a bunch of guys out of Texas, and I wouldn't trade one Yankee for a dozen of them. You just had trouble all the time finding some of them guys. They just wouldn't work, you know. And at that time the building was all painted, and when they take the hot stuff out of that mop and run it over, then we'd have to clean it off the building. And I got there to show them how to wring their mop and stick it along that gravel stop without running that over that gravel stop. And I got bumped to the hoist, where the hoist come up and went across. And then I fell, knocked me down. And I fell off from the top of one of them buildings. I fell 31 feet on cement. And then I got up and walked off. That's right. I got up and walked off. And I broke all up. But my legs was all right, and I got up. And George Bennett was there. He was kind of a Castonian up there in that building. And when they took me in the room and they put me on the stretcher and took me in the room, I done run into, looked up and looked at George Bennett, and I put this arm's all broke up around his leg, and I said, George, whatever you do, don't let them take me to the Solid Hospital. And I was broke all up too. That was in the rough of my mouth. That was in the rough of my mouth. And I stayed down there for about 2 months. Down there in the hospital, down St. Benedict, not the St. Juvenile Hospital.
St. Mark's.
St. Mark's.
Well, they didn't clean you up for a couple of days, did they? They didn't think you was going to live.
Well, it happened on a Friday morning about 10. On Sunday morning they called my family and they figured I'd die Sunday morning. And I told them all the time I wasn't sick enough to die. But they called my family all in, and they never even took my dirty clothes off or washed the blood off my face or nothing. And when they found out Sunday morning I didn't die Sunday morning, why they started work on me Monday morning. And I laid in there for pretty near 2 months. The surgeon came down there one time, and he didn't even know who it was. And but after I put my arm around George Bennett, he come and got Tom Thurgood, and they come down there, down to the hospital. Him and George Bennett, him and Tom Thurgood. And then after I got out of there, I started, I bought me another truck again. I started trucking. After I got well enough so I could drive, and then I started trucking and started buying horses. And I bought horses for years. Shipped them all over this country. I put horses on the Canadian Islands and right out to Long Island, New York, and pretty near every place between here and there. And I bought a bunch of horses out of Kimmerell, Wyoming, off my government up there one time. And we went out and built a yard, the government did, between 2 layers of rock so they couldn't get out. They built a yard. And we took a little airplane and rounded them horses up into that ravine locked them in there. And I shipped 10 cars of horses out of that one bunch. 10 cars. I had them for California. And of course at the time we had to unload and feed in Las Vegas, then I'd divert them one place to another. But I shipped 10 cars.
These were open range wild horses, right? Well,
Yeah, all wild horses.
Where would they get them from?
Huh?
Where would you get the wild horses from?
Well, they're just out on the ranch, on the desert. Up there, I got a camera well. And everything that didn't have a brand was mine. Of course, I had to pay so much for a horse. And everything that had a brand, we had to turn them back out. But I got 250 horses out of there at one time. On one train. And then I got monkeying around with rodeos. I was buying a lot of horses. And I was taking some that I thought would make bucking horses, rodeo horses, you know. And then I started rodeo. I rodeoed for 5 years till they took me out of it.
Whereabouts? Morgan, one area?
All over.
All over.
All over. I run all over. I rodeoed and put Kaysville in and all over. But I had too much to do, day and night work, and rodeos for all night, you know. So I was kind of getting bothered with my health, and the doc said to just quit something, so I quit rodeoing. And then I started, the horses got kind of high, and they got a lot of these quarter horses mixed up with them. They got kind of high, so I quit that and started into cattle. And I bought cattle pretty much all these farmers had a few cattle all the time. Buy their cattle and truck them to them, and I had 2 trucks in. But I've had a pretty exciting life. I'll tell you, when you go around in them horses in a little airplane, if you don't get thrills out of that, you're something wrong. Because you never could get over them. You'd have to go in and bank them, and turn around and go this way. And then go in and do that and keep them going ahead. Because if you run over them, then they turn and go back. You'd have to bank it. I'll tell you, that was a thrill.
You didn't drive the airplane, did you?
No.
Had somebody there.
No, there's a government airplane. But bought a lot of horses in my time. But I'll tell you, anytime you drive, doing what I was doing, and drive 90,000 miles a year, your truck wasn't standing in the driveway all the time, I'll tell you that.
90,000, a lot, isn't it?
No, sir. And I could put 90,000 a year in them trucks all the time.
You'd have to be on the road a good share of the time.
Yeah. We was trucking sheep out of Wyoming, out south of Wyoming, about 40 miles, and I was making 2 trips a day, and the other guys that was trucking was hauling in dogs and then. And I was making 2 trips a day, and them guys were making 3 trips every 2 days. They'd go up and back and then up, and then the same way. And I was making 2 trips every day.
Over a period of years, Walt, you bought a lot of cattle for the monastery, haven't you? You bought a lot of cattle for the monastery up here too, haven't you?
For who?
The monastery?
Oh yeah, I bought a lot of cattle out of monasteries. I know Nichols real well. I was telling him at the time, I know him just as well as can be, Nichols. He's manager of this deal up there. And I was telling him about my little deal when I fell off that roof. But the Lord wouldn't have me, so I had to find a place to go. And he said, you come up here, he says, we'll take you. And he says, we'll take you. But I bought a lot of cattle, done a lot of work for the monastery, a lot of work. I bought a lot of their bulls too. In fact, Hamlin's down there's got all his bulls. He's still got 2 of them that I put down in there. Holstein bulls. But but all these farmers used to feed a few cattle all the time, feed their feed up, you know.
Raise their hay.
Now they've quit. They've quit.
Do you remember the Homer's Barbershop that was here, Walt? Is
Yeah.
that about here?
I got a picture of that.
Have you? We'd appreciate, I don't think we have that for a book. If we could take it just long enough to get a duplicate, we'd appreciate it.
I'm sure I got a picture of that. Huh?
Who was the choir director then?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. Lila and I both used to sing in the choir. That was the old dumping grounds that the Navy base put in, and I fixed it all up and growed some tomatoes in it. There's one of my outfits.
One of your older outfits.
22.
I guess some of them are still here in the community, aren't they?
Well, that one up here by Maud Bennett's, that Thurgood moved in there. I moved that in there. And there's 2 here on the Rampton place. And then there's one over on that Moss place over there. There's that. No, that ain't it either. There it is.
That's the addition on the back, huh?
Yeah, I put 2 rooms on the back, moved up to Navy base.
Who's that there by it?
Well, that's appraiser. Your county appraiser at one time.
That's a different picture that's in there anyway.
Yeah, it is.
See, I put about 200 loads of fill dirt in here when I built this house. I put 4 feet.
Did you?
I remember being in your home when you lived here at one time. I don't remember the occasion, but I was in your home.
We didn't have it as convenient then as we got now.
Do you think, would you let us take that to get a copy?
Yeah.
And if I get it right back, we have a girl that works for Inkley's that she gets it within a day or 2. Appreciate getting that.
Well, that I built this house right where that sits. Let's see, there might be something else you'd want in there too.
Do you remember the Syracuse Mercantile when their lumber yard on the east side of the street?
Yeah.
Do you?
Mm-hmm.
And they had a nice shed and coal too, didn't they? And a little lumber on the
Your old store is right across the street.
Lloyd's.
Lloyd's moved it up there. That's Burl when he's on his mission. It's a little horse I broke, and where I planted that grass up there, it growed up weeds, and I broke him riding up in that place up there. You know I planted that grass, don't you?
Up here on the,
Right here.
Oh, the park.
By the parking lot.
no,
I summer followed that. That grew up weeds and it was under the horse's belly when I'd ride up through there. And Farrell Daly was bishop at the time, and he come to me and wanted me just to oversee it, to plant that grass. And Lawrence Briggs at that time was bishop of that ward. And he said Lawrence had picked a man to help me, you know. And I wouldn't have to do nothing. He said I wouldn't have to do nothing. If I wanted a tractor, he'd get some of them farmers to go help me with the tractor and that. And the first time I called him for a tractor, he said, well, he says, I can't get you one, I can get you one in about 2 days. Get so-and-so to help you. And what I done was hired Tommy Matter with his big dish. And I never called him anymore about getting some help. And I dished that up about once a week because that grass was in there and weeds and that. And you can't kill them all in one time, one disking, you know. And I summer followed that all summer. I summered it all summer long. I hired Tom. And then after I got it, what I thought was ready to plant, I got one of these big levelers, hired a big leveler. And I leveled that up and down both ways in kitty corner because you had that hill in there. And at that time they was flooding it. They wasn't irrigating it from sprinklers. They was flooding it. And when I got ready to plant it, why, I used to buy cattle from a little Jap over in Plain City. Used to buy him some cattle and stuff, worked quite a lot with him. And he was taken and planting grass along this highways and then golf courses. And he had a little tractor, and I tried to hire him to come over and plant that grass. And he says, well, he says, I can't do that. He says, I'm so busy. But he says, knowing you, he says, I'll let you take my tractor. So I told him to set it about right for grass, you know. And I went over and got it. Ahead of that, though, Lawrence Briggs was going to buy the grass, the seed, and he didn't. He didn't get it done. He's busy or something. And when I went over when I talked to him about cedar, he told me, he says, well, he says, have you got your grass bought? And I said, no. He says, well, before you come get your cedar, he says, why don't you go down and buy your grass? Because I'll be using the cedar, you know. And he gave me an order to buy the grass down there like he buys it. And that was golf grass. That wasn't just lawn grass, it was golf grass. And Lawrence said he could buy it for 43 or 73 cents a pound. I bought it for 43 through the little Jap. And I got his tractor and I planted it up and down and still had seed left over. I planted it this way till I about run out of seed, and I thought, well, I better keep a little seed, you know. So I took the seed home. Meantime, I'd have had a bunch of signs built about that square and put them on a lath, you know, so I could drive them in the ground. And when I got through planting it, I put that around that, stay off the grass, you know. And as I say, I got through on a Friday. And I went out after the paper Sunday morning. They had the big doings down to the church house Saturday. And I went out Sunday morning, and Davis was custodian of the church house at that time. And he hollered up, went out after the paper, and he hollered up, he says, Walt, he says, you been out on your grass this morning? And I said, no. He said, they was running all over that with an automobile. They knocked them signs down, but they didn't get in very far. They got on the hill, they didn't get in very far. So I took my rake and went out and sowed more grass in there and leveled it up. And that's what they turn up with. And then when spring come, why, there's quite a lot of weeds still come up into it, and they didn't cut it soon enough. So Farrell come to me and he said, well, what are we going to do with that grass now? He said, it was all some weeds growed into it, which it would do, because you don't kill them all in 1 year, you know. I said, well, the best thing to do, Farrell, is turn it back over to me now. Summer followed again this summer. He said, no, you can't do that. So what I done, if you remember when they had these little tractors, formal tractors, then they had a little blade out the side, maybe 5 or 6 feet blade, you know, that they just cut peas with when they raised a lot of peas. And Bill Knighton had one of them little tractors, so I hired Bill Knighton to come in and cut that. Then I baled it, had it baled, and I gave it to Clayton Holt. He had a palomino, not a palomino, but a pinto horse to feed his horse with. And that's where the grass turned out. But when Bush Fielding come, and when he said Lawrence Briggs had picked him to help me, and I guess I was kind of dumb, pretty dumb, because he stood with me within, maybe this feet, and I could just smell his breath of drinking and stuff like that. And I got no patience with someone who'd been drinking, no time. And Bush said, well, he said, you picked me to help you put that grass in. He said, what do you want me to do? And I said, Bush, the first thing I want you to do, I want you to go home and sober up. And then come and I'll talk to you. And he never sobered up, I guess, because he never come back. He never come back. But it was kind of ignorant, I guess, of me to do that. But I haven't got no patience. I bought a lot of horses. And man had been drinking, I just walk away from him. Just walk away from him. I can't stand it.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your family, your boys and girls?
Well, I've had 5 children, 2 boys and a girl, 2 and 3 girls. And out of the 5 of them, I've had 15 missionaries go out. And I've helped every one of them, 15 missionaries out. And one lives in Sunset, one lives down in, it's about, 60-something south on Redwood Road. And then Ver lives in Hyde Park, and Dean lived in Kaysville all the time. And Nora and Glenda lives in Kaysville, but they're all out on their own. But I don't know. That's what I copy my others over.
We want to get a picture of this, son. Can you zero in on that, and Walt, tell us a little bit, how many of those have you made, Walt?
Oh, I guess 200 or 300, 200 or more. I guess. Oh, I was going to show you something here.
You got a good picture of it, huh?
Gosh, getting them all out.
I kept off for just a minute and see. 4-H clubs?
I had 52 calves here in Syracuse. And I stayed with them for I don't know how many years. And then the future farmers at Kaysville High School, he figured I ought to buy his cattle for him on his future farmer deal, you know what I mean? And then when I trim the boys' cattle here, trim their tails and their face and everything for show, he figured I ought to do that for him too. I quit him. And I quit 4-H club too because I had plenty to do anyway. But I had 52 calves in here at one time. And I furnished quite a lot of the calves for Kaysville, for the farmers, for future farmers. That's as big as that rubber plant was one time. Look what it is now.
I don't know whether you can get that or not, son. Rubber plant.
But that's my dad and mother's house down there. Look at the flowers.
Could I see that? Could we see that? Now, is that still here?
Mm-hmm.
Is this still, the home still here?
No, that was in Bonneville. That's when she moved to Bonneville.
Okay.
Where did they live before they moved to Bountiful, Walt?
Well, they lived over by the Warrens. The house is not there now.
Yeah.
But it's just west of where Lee Warren lives. Don't you remember that frame
Yeah,
home?
I remember that frame home, just between
I
Lee
built
Warren's
onto it.
and-
I bought the place later. And then I built onto that frame house. I built on the north side of it. We had a flowing well there. All the drinking water we used to have when we was kids was surface wells that we dig, you know what I mean? Drawn up with a bucket. Quite a lot of jerseys, you know. And there was a little bull, I guess maybe weighed 500 pounds. Come in on the ball diamond one time and those guys got it. And when the bell had rung for school, we caught the little devil and put him in the hallway. And the first beller he made out, you ought to sue the schools. Kids get outside. Oh dear. But
Was you there when they brought Art Anderson there as principal?
no, it seemed like Walt Steed was principal at that
Was
time.
he? I know they
And then
brought
Art's brother was there a time or two. He stayed there for a while.
Art Anderson's brother.
Owen,
Mm-hmm.
he's a little younger than Art.
Younger than him.
We got an interview going.
But I know Tom Thurgood tried to get him to put, when Art was teaching, tried to put him out.
He was pretty tough, wasn't he? Pretty stern.
They said he wasn't smart enough to teach school. Art Anderson. And Tom tried to put him out of there, but they didn't get him put out.
I'd heard that they brought Art in because they'd had quite a bit of discipline problems.
Yeah, the kids was running the school.
And they brought Art Anderson in to take care of him. He got her done.
Guys like Jim was too mean to
No,
them.
that's before my time. That was a few older guys.
Well, they did used to do like they do now too. You know what I mean? They're a little rougher and tougher all the time. I know we pretty near burned that high school down up on the corner. A bunch of us guys.
Did you?
hmm
How'd you do that?
Well, was in the manual training room, and you had a wood stove, big wood stove, keep that thing warm. I've got 2 or 3 things I built up in that place now in my house.
Right.
And so we decided to have a chicory one night. So a bunch of us, about, I don't know, 10 or 12 of us guys got in there and had a chicory. And we had a big fire in that stove, and I'll be darned if we didn't tip it over. We had to roll it outside. And we hadn't, well, it was a little rougher times then than it is now.
Chicory, now, I'm not sure people know what that is. Why don't you tell us what a chicory is, Walt?
We went out and hocked some chicken and cooking it. Cut it up and was cooking it. And I don't know, somewhere or another, we tipped that stove over.
Was it at night that you was up there?
Night, yeah, it was in the night. I know Melvin Stewart was from Clinton was in there, and when we tipped the stove over, he left, wouldn't help us roll the stove out, get it out so it didn't burn up, And he got over there by, where Ken Elson lives now, over that street. And then he stopped and waited for the schoolhouse to blaze up. Thought we'd burn that schoolhouse up, but we didn't. But I've got 2 or 3 things I built in that manual training room in my house now.
Who was the kids about your age? Walt went to school with you. Joe Steed?
Joe Steed, and, I don't know, there's a lot of them because they come from all over. Clinton and Clearfield and all over. But, yeah, there used to be a little shop there next to that high school.
Trying to think of the names of the people. Judkins owned it. We've been trying to find one of their progenitors to get an interview and ask them about it, but I haven't located one yet. Judkins.
Hell, I thought I had a picture of that, what I was looking at later, of that shop, but it didn't. It was about the size of that barbershop that was here.
Was it?
Did you get any history on this cheese factory up there when they processed cheese up there?
No.
You haven't got any? Didn't they used to process cheese up there where the Glenn's House of Meat is now, Walt?
What?
Didn't they used to process cheese up there? Wasn't that a cheese factory?
Yeah, they made cheese up there. All the farmers got together and built that little building, and then they made cheese there.
The farmers helped put it together, build it?
Milk, put milk in there and used their milk up and made cheese out of it.
Then they sold the cheese, distributed the cheese, or?
Who operated it? Do you remember? Or who hauled the milk?
Oh, darn, I don't remember.
Did Clyde Hanson haul the milk then?
Yeah.
Clyde was a hauler.
Yeah, they made quite a lot of cheese up there, and then finally Fellers bought it.
Well, there's a blacksmith up there in between, wasn't there?
Huh?
Didn't they have a blacksmith shop in there in between?
Yeah,
Eastman or something?
Jensen did, wasn't it?
Jensen? I don't know. I thought I remember going up there to the
Had a blacksmith.
blacksmith shop.
And then when they got through, they sold that to Fellers, and they started killing cattle.
Mm-hmm.
And then I bought cattle for Glenn ever since he's been there, up until the last 2 years.
Glenn married a feller, didn't he?
Hmm?
Glenn married a feller, didn't he?
Yeah.
Married one of the girls.
Mm-hmm. Jack Fellers. And I bought his cattle all the time he was there up until about the last year. And then I think he's going to get run out now and sell it to somebody else.
Glenn is?
I heard last night that some guy from Catesville's going to take it over.
Okay, Walt, I think we've, unless there's something you can think of there, we've got quite a bit.
Well, all these farmers used to feed a few cattle. I used to buy their cattle and truck them back and forth and stuff like that. But I've got a check now in that from a widow from up at South Weber that I used to buy her dad cattle before he died. And I bought them some to put in her pasture and go get them and stuff like that after he died. And I never did charge him nothing. And she sent me a check for $50 for Christmas.
Why don't you sign it and I'll take care of it for you?
I never did take them. John Stokes died and had a bunch of milk cows out there. And that guy from Van Dyke come out and tried to buy them. And she wouldn't sell them until she seen me talk to me. And I'll bet you I got her $50 a head for them. I sold them darn things and I never charged her a dime. This lady that lives up here in the old Hanson place.
Clausen?
I moved their cattle and never charged her nothing. I moved Cleo Bennett's cattle and never charged them nothing. I moved Wallace Gailey's cattle, not Gailey, but Christensen's. When Wallace died, never charged him nothing. And I've got my first time to charge just like this. I've got my first time to ever charge a widow anything to handle the cattle.
That's tremendous, Walt.
That's right, though. That's as true as I live. It's just as true as I sit right here. And I never charged them a dime for none of it. No, sir. And I'll bet you if Jim's mother's alive, he'd tell you the same thing.
Yeah.
If his mother's alive, he'd tell you the same thing. Yes, sir. What's his name had quite a... John Stoker had quite a dairy head. Oh, at that time, probably 15 or 20 heads, you know what I mean? And I sold them cattle. I put them out to a dairyman. I started 2 or 3 dairymen in milk business around here too. I started 1/3 in the business at one time. Yeah. I went down there just out of Scipio down there when I was buying a few milk cows and placing these in these dairies. I went down to way out east of Scipio. They told me about a bunch of dairy cattle there. cows they was going to sell. That dairy was going to sell out to bankruptcy or something. And I went down and looked at those cattle. And before I got through, I bought 106 head of Holstein cows. And them cows went as far as down into Arizona. As far as Tucson, Arizona, some of them cows. So I've done a few things in my life that I'll tell you, when you get to handle these milk cows like that, and doing that before you have to milk them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I bought 106 head of milk cows out of one dairy.
You've moved a lot of cattle and horses without making any money, haven't you?
Well, I've worked too cheap all my life, that's for sure. I had the doctor sew my head up here, 11 little stitches in there. And you know, it took him just 11 little stitches. And I don't think he spent 15 minutes with me. And he sent me a bill for $250, 256 something. Yes, sir. So I've been working too cheap all my life.
A lot of us have, Walt.
Yeah. But I've done a lot of things in my time, Don.
Yeah, I'm sure.
A lot of things in my time.
And it's good to get it recorded.
A lot of things in my time. I drove a lot of miles.
Anything else?
Not really, Don. Maybe Walt will come up with little things that he can jot down in between and maybe add to.
Yeah, if you think of anything, jot it down or write it down.
And they'd give us guys a Christmas party. And we'd gone down the stairs. I had the eating joint downstairs. You'd go down and have anything you wanted to eat on the house. And they had a little bar over here, and you could have all you wanted to drink. You could have anything you wanted to drink. If you wanted to go in a little room over here, they had a gambling place there where you could gamble. And so one Christmas time, why, Roland Knowles went in manager's stockyard. They changed managers. And during Christmas time, he gave me a fifth of liquor. Called me in. He said, "Walt, come in here." He said, in his office, and he says, "I want to give you something." And he gave me a fifth of liquor. And I said, "Roland," I said, "all the time you throw a party here for us guys on Christmas and New Year's." I said, "Did you ever see me drink any of it?" And he said, "No." But he said, "I want to give you something for Christmas." And he said, "If you want to take it home and pour it down the sink, that's all right with me, but I want to give you something." And at that time I was wearing Levi's then because I was in the cattle. And I shoved it in my pocket here in Levi's tight pants, you know, held my hand over it and walked clear up to the top end in my truck so people wouldn't see it. And that's sitting right in my house now. And that was back in '52.
We ought to uncork it and see if it's spoiled.
Well, maybe one of you guys is here, we could do that. How about it?
He's quite a lot. I enjoy him.
Pretty nimble for 9.
Oh,
I
I
know.
don't know how he gets stuff.
And lived alone as long as I have. I've lived alone 26
Well, you haven't had a woman to drive you to it. See, that's the reason it's still court. If you'd had a woman, you'd have had that drink a dozen times.
But I've got another damn little deal that I'll get worth some money. It's getting rubbed off, fading off, I don't know. But that's about 20 years older than that one.
This 20 years older than this one?
Yeah, I've had that a long time.
60 years old or better, huh?
Hmm?
That's 60 years older or better, New York. But you was telling me the last time you had a drink or two, that was down in Las Vegas, wasn't it? 1937?
Oh, that back in 37 when they give me, I was buying a lot of horses then, and I was going to load it out at Howell down there. I was going to load a carload of horses out. And someone come by and he says, hollered at me and he says, well, he says, there's a fellow by the name of Skinner down in Delta. He's got 20 some odd head of horses. He said, if I seen you, I'd send you down. So I jumped from the truck, it was in the middle of the afternoon. I shipped them horses out and I jumped in the truck and went to Delta. Oh, before then, no, I'd have gone down to a little place out of Howell and bought a horse off, saddle horse off from a guy that was selling liquor, a little liquor store. I bought the horse off him, and I don't know what it ever made me do it. But after I bought his horse, I bought a pint of liquor. And it's the first pint of liquor I ever bought in my life. And I don't know why I bought it, but I did. And I put it in the jockey box of my truck. And I got down to Delta and looked at these horses, and there's all little stud colts and stuff that you couldn't use, I couldn't ship. So I stayed at Delta all night. And while I was eating supper, why, a fella come in and said that down at Hinckley that he knew of a fella that had 3 big teams and a bunch of mules. And he wanted to sell. So I stayed all night in Delta. And I don't know whatever made me do it. But when I went, I had supper at the hotel there and went up to eat. Why, I poured me out a little out of this pint of liquor. And I'll tell you, I never got to bed. I threw up all in the sink. The sink was plugged and everything else. I never did get in bed. So I went down, and after I got cleaned up, and went down in the cafe and ordered me a meal. When that warm stuff hit me in the face, oh, I was as sick as a man could be in the world. So I just left it and went down to Hinckley, and I bought 3 big teams and 20 head of mules. And I loaded them on a car and sent them east. And then I was there all day the next day. So when I headed back into Howell, I had some more stuff there to pick up at Howell. And facing that sun, I done it in the morning, and hitting that sun driving east. Oh, I was sick. Gosh, I was sick. And I promised this guy, if I ever got over it, I'd never do it again. And I'd never done it again.
That's 1937.
Yeah, that was back in 37. And I took a bunch of, I bought a carload of wild horses out of Montana come in. And I had a guy by the name of Smith that lived out of into Wyoming. And he wanted a couple of studs to turn out to breed some of them wild horses. And then he wanted an old wagon turned in here. So I got an old pair of running gears and a couple of studs and put in my truck and went to Wyoming. And I got out to Lone Tree. That's where I was supposed to meet him. And from there out to his place, it was just a dirt road, you know what I mean? It looked like it was going to rain like the devil. And the guy there at the service station told me, he says, if it rains, he says, you can't get across there with your truck. So I said, well, I'll go on out to his ranch then. He told me about where to go. And I said, I'll go out to his ranch, and I said, when Smith comes, you tell him I'm ahead of him. And Smith didn't come till after it rained. And he come in, and he's mud up at about there on his legs where he got stuck off the road. And he's mud, and he's packing the jug in both hands. And so we sat around there, stayed all night with him, and we sat around there, and after supper, why, he put a glass on the table, and one for me and one for him, and poured a big drink in the glass, you know. I thought, well, what am I going to do now? So back in the corner from where I was sitting, there's one of these big old Japanese Jews have sauce in them, you know. I've got one in there now. Well, there's one right there, sitting there with a big fern in it. And when he wasn't looking in that, I poured mine in that fern. And then I'd set it back up on the table, and pretty soon he'd pour full again, big drink in there again. It was changing him, but it wasn't changing me. And he says, GD, he says, you can sure drink hold a lot of liquor and not show it. But I'd like to see that fern the next time. I'd like to see that fern the next time. But I promised myself when I drove up that road in 37, if I ever got over it, I'd never do it again. And I've never touched it since. But
well, Walter, I think we appreciate
but I've had